This video will concentrate upon the sorts of delusions commonly experienced by people on the caseloads of nurses and support workers up and down the country. I'm going to describe some composite individuals here. These people aren't real, but they're based upon several others that I have worked with. However, I've been careful to remove any identifying details. If you think you know them, I can assure you you're mistaken. They don't exist outside of this video and the accompanying multimedia presentations. I say that because their stories will sound familiar to many. This stuff happens a lot. Jamie's story. Jamie is 26 years old and a loner. To all intents and purposes, he had a happy enough childhood. He did well at school. Everyone predicted a bright future for Jamie. He wasn't just clever, he was gifted. He was special. His older sister, Amanda, had already qualified as a doctor when Jamie went to university, and their parents regularly held Amanda up as an example to him. The pressure that Jamie felt to live up to Amanda's achievements wasn't really obvious at first, because he'd always been top of his class through secondary school and had gone to university with excellent grades. He did allow himself to breathe a sigh of relief as he left home to travel the 200 miles to campus where he was to study marine biology. His father had criticised his choice of subject because he didn't see it as worthwhile, especially compared to Amanda's choice of medicine. His mother was immensely proud that her daughter was a doctor and had even bought Amanda a t-shirt with the slogan, "Be the doctor your mother wanted you to marry," emblazoned on the front. Jamie really did have something to prove. The first few months of university hit Jamie hard. He was no longer the top of the class. Everyone there had excelled at school, and everyone had been expected to do well. That's what happens when you get into the best university. You're a small fish in a big pond. Jamie began to worry that he might not make the grade in his parents' eyes. He might not get his degree. After all, it was much harder going than he'd expected. Jamie worried so much about this that he fell behind in his studies. In the past, he'd always had someone to talk to about his stresses, but not now. Alone in a strange town, he had nobody close enough to tell his fears to. So he sat in his room in the halls of residence night after night and fretted. His self-esteem plummeted, and with it his sense of value, his self-worth. If he couldn't get his degree, who would want him? What would be the point of carrying on? Above all, Jamie needed a way to feel special again. Then something remarkable happened. As he sat in a lecture on the evolution of mollusks, not usually his favourite topic, he had an experience. The lecturer, for some reason or another, had quoted Stephen Hawking, something about knowing the mind of God, and he realised that if only he could tap into the specialness that he once enjoyed, he could indeed understand the divine plan. Jamie left the university campus that day and never went back. He joined a church, but the congregation didn't seem to understand his divine role in the world, so he left. He would have to work this out on his own. He moved into a bedsit and began poring over esoteric books he'd borrowed from the local library. He didn't always take them back because, well, let's face it, normal rules don't apply to someone as special as he was. Eventually, the library banned him, and a deep feeling of resentment began to take hold. What right had these mere mortals to interfere with his development? Eventually, Jamie realised that the library wasn't really the problem. They were just people, and they were influenced by demonic forces bent on preventing him from becoming divine. He had a mission to save the world. He wasn't altogether clear what from, but the dark forces would do all that they could to stop him. He began to grow paranoid, seeing danger and malevolence in the faces of strangers he passed on the street. The demons were everywhere. Soon he couldn't leave his little bedsit without feeling as though he would be attacked at any moment. His paranoia made him a recluse. In the normal course of psychiatric evaluation and treatment, Jamie's delusions would be almost certainly assumed to be biological, and he would be prescribed antipsychotics. And yet the problems he experienced may be no more biological or chemical than the frustration he felt at falling behind in his studies. Jamie has lost his sense of being in control. The coursework was just too hard. He also lost his normal support network. 200 miles is a long way to go for a friendly chat with your old mates. He was under pressure to excel like Amanda, and yet he was becoming increasingly aware that he wouldn't make the grade. He was no longer special or gifted. He was average at best, and well on his way to seeing himself only as a loser. And then, with a single belief, he got it all back again. He was special. He was divine. He was in control. And soon, he'd be even more in control when he achieved the greatness that was to come. How much better would it be to save the world as a deity than to save a few lives as a doctor? Eat your heart out, Amanda. It's true that the paranoia wasn't pleasant, and the need to stay indoors was very restrictive, but they were necessary evils. Without the paranoia, his divinity wouldn't make any sense. So he became a recluse, because if he didn't, there could be only two possibilities. The demons would get him, or he would have to acknowledge that there were no demons, that he wasn't divine, and that he really had been out of his depth at university. Whatever he chose, the consequences would be terrible for his self-esteem. Either he wasn't divine and therefore no longer special, or he would be thwarted by demons. Jamie's paranoia was part of a systematized delusional state that allows him to maintain his self-esteem. There's no need to rely too much on biology to make sense of this delusion. Of course, biology plays a part, and that's important. Human beings are biological entities. Everything we think, feel, and do has a biological correlate. And if that biology gets out of whack, we're far more likely to make mistakes, to feel unusual things, and to perceive inaccurate stuff through our five senses, and to think and believe fantastical ideas in our carbon-based brains. Biology really matters, and there's no way it can be left out of the picture. But it's really not the whole story. Let's look at another example. Janice's story. Janice is in her mid-30s. She's single and has shunned men throughout her adult life, believing that semen is toxic and that sexual intercourse will poison her. She's quite able to have friendships with men. She even has a male key worker. But nothing more. Whenever a man tries to get too close to her, she breaks down in tears or has panic attacks. In fact, the terror in these situations is hard to describe. It has to be seen to be believed. Whenever she's approached by men in that way, Janice indulges in deliberate self-harm, drinks bleach, and refuses to wash or remove any of the many layers of clothing she wears. Her key worker, John, has learned that wearing too many clothes is a sign of relapse for Janice, and he usually responds by contacting the local mental health team. What John doesn't know is Janice's personal history. He doesn't know this because Janice hasn't told him. She can't. Her entire delusional system is there specifically to help her not to face it. And so she's not going to spill the beans easily. Had he known her history, he might have more understanding of Janice's delusion. He'd know that she was repeatedly raped by her father and uncle from the age of 7 until she left home at 16. He would know that her first sexual experiences with boyfriends after she left home had brought all those buried emotions about loss of control and dirtiness flooding back as though someone had opened Pandora's box. He would also have understood that to admit the abuse would tear her family apart, and that this is too terrifying for Janice. The only genuinely supportive friendship she had was with her mother and her two sisters. They'd never spoken about the abuse. She doesn't even know if the same thing happened to her sisters as well. She can't risk opening up and losing the only support she has outside of those workers who are paid to be there and who she knows might move on at any moment. But she can't have a normal, intimate relationship with a man either. So Janice invents a delusion to keep herself safe. She fixes upon a belief based upon a magazine article she read once about sexually transmitted diseases. That lets her justify her reluctance without facing the truth. Arguably, no amount of medication alone will help Janice to foster a more relaxed attitude to men. That's not what this delusion's about. She needs to feel secure before she can let it go. That doesn't necessarily mean that she needs to talk about the abuse she experienced. She might, but that's by no means certain. For many people, feeling safe in the here and now is far more important than some sort of psychological archaeology. To force people to revisit their traumatic pasts can be damaging. Instead, Janice needs security and the confidence to acknowledge that she is safe. You see, it's not just brain chemistry that makes a difference in cases like Janice's. It may be that Janice is more vulnerable to psychosis than others because of her particular chemistry, genetic makeup, but that's not really what did it. Janice experienced a trauma so extreme that many people would become mentally ill as a result. In fact, many people do. Medication may help to control the symptoms of distress, but that's only about managing distress, not about dealing with the underlying problem. There is real value in medicine, and antipsychotics are certainly useful, but the real work of recovery takes more than that. The most important part of mental health care relates to environment, relationship, and coping skills. I'm Stuart Sorensen. You can find me at www.mindthecaretraining.com. Please, feel free, go over there, have a look. But before you do, if you've enjoyed this video, if you found it useful or helpful in any way, please like it and share it. And if you subscribe to the channel, you won't miss any future videos either. Thank you very much for watching.